Welcome back to the Dreamcatcher vlog and behavior management strategies. Last time we met, I mentioned that managing behaviors, there's a lot more to it than what most people think about. And today we're going to start breaking some of those pieces down. I think one of the common beliefs is that if we just target that bad behavior, if we tell our children to stop, the behavior will go away. But we know from experience there's more to it than that. That behavior that we want to eliminate is actually something that we're going to focus on much later. In order to be successful at managing behaviors, we need to build a solid foundation for our children so that they can use the strategies and be successful with them instead of failing all of the time. If you think about building a house, we need a strong, solid foundation with no cracks. It can't crumble anywhere. And we build the frame and the floors and the walls, etc., etc. It's the same thing with our children. We need to help them build a solid foundation so they can use behavior management strategies in a positive, successful manner. The first thing to start building this solid foundation is to actually take a look at ourselves and our language. When I first started working with children, it was in childcare settings. And my very first course of my early childhood education was actually looking at how do we provide directions and instructions to children in a positive manner. So we were looking at our language. And the exercise I remember doing was we had to eliminate the words don't and no. And my first thought was, I'm sure I can do that. That's really easy. I don't use those words very often. So the scenario I remember getting was, little boy is climbing up the slide. How do you direct him? And my first thought was, don't climb up the slide. Well, I wasn't allowed to use that word though. One of the ways that you can direct this child in a positive manner is by reminding him to go up the ladder and down the slide. We use words like don't and no so quickly in our vocabulary, we don't think about it most of the time. So trying to eliminate those words can be really challenging. But that's exactly what I'm going to ask you to do. Take the word don't and no and toss it aside. Another phrase that I hear quite often is don't yell inside or don't yell. Remind your child, we're inside right now. We have to use a quiet voice. And then you can model for them. No is a word that I think if we actually had a clicker and we counted throughout our day, we probably use way more than we're aware of. The next time your child asks you a question, if the response is going to be no, I want you to take a second and think about a different response. So for example, child bounces up to you, can I have a pop for snack? Pop is really delicious, but we say pop for special occasion in this house. How about we find you something else to drink? I know the way that I've worded it takes a lot longer than just saying no. But by not saying no, I haven't shut the child down, and I've helped him understand why we don't have pop at snack time, and then I've helped him find an alternate solution. If I had just said no, I've shut him down. He may feel cranky, I may get cranky, and the whole situation escalates from there. And I haven't been able to tell him why. With that said, there are times when saying no or don't are needed. If there's an emergency situation, your child is reaching for that hot pot on the stove or about to dart out into traffic on the road, we need to yell no, we need to yell don't, stop, to get our child's attention to keep them safe. The problem is that if we use no, don't all the time in our vocabulary, when we need it for emergency purposes, our children may stop listening to us. There's different ways that we can change our behavior. I often hear adults talking to children in an unhelpful way and not very positive. It's almost as if they're labeling their children. For example, I hear parents say, you're so lazy, or oh, you're being stupid right now, or he's been so bad this week. We've actually just branded our children lazy, stupid, and bad. So let's rephrase those comments. You're being lazy can be turned into, looks like you're having a lazy day today. You're being stupid right now. Oh, today it doesn't seem like you're making very good choices. He's being bad is something I hear quite often from parents that come here with their children. A more helpful way of putting it is, Johnny's had a really tough week, listening, staying focused, concentrating, whatever that bad behavior is. You know what, just for fun, let's take out that word bad from our vocabulary too. And its opposite, good. Those two words really aren't descriptive, so they're not really that helpful. Another phrase I often hear is, you never listen to me. Although it may sometimes feel that way, using absolute words like never and always impacts how our children think about themselves. And when they put them together with those words like bad and lazy, they start defining themselves in this really negative way. I'm always lazy. I never listen. I'm always bad. This negative way of thinking is associated with things like depression and anxiety. To make it more concrete, you can say something like, today, it seems to me like you haven't heard a word I've said. I've kept it in the moment about today, and from my perspective, it seems to me. And it probably does seem like that day he really hasn't listened to you. Another way to change our language is to be aware of the questions that we use. If you think about an average day, you probably ask your child anywhere from 5 to 500 questions in a day. Closed-ended questions and nonsensical questions are generally the questions that can get kind of tricky and sometimes escalate situations. Closed-ended questions are questions that only require a yes or no answer. We probably ask those the most in a day. And generally speaking, they're fine. Do you want an apple for your lunch today? No. End of discussion. Where it becomes tricky and where problems sometimes occur is when we're trying to direct our children or get them to do something and we ask them a closed-ended question. So for example, can you pick up your toys? The child has the right to say yes or no. I know that's not your intention. You're trying to be nice and get them to clean up the toys. But you've allowed them to say yes or no. So it's important to be prepared for that no answer and not get angry with them. Oftentimes I'll hear parents say, that wasn't a choice. Actually, it was a choice by you asking a closed-ended question. Parents often want to be polite and have their children cooperating with them. And that's fine. We can give a direction and still be polite and respectful. For example, Johnny, it's time to clean up your toys now. Do you want some help? I was polite, I was very kind, but I've given my instruction and that I want it done now. I've also ended with a closed-ended question of, do you want some help? If he says no, that's okay. I don't have to help. If he says yes, great. I get to spend some extra time with him, building that relationship, that attachment. Maybe I get to role model how to put the toys away. Maybe at cleanup time Johnny doesn't like to when he throws his toys. Or I just get to admire what he made. Maybe spent an hour making Lego. Nonsensical questions are simply that. They're questions that don't make sense. A great example is, do you think that's really a good idea? It's kind of broad. Maybe your child doesn't know what a good idea is. Generally speaking, nonsensical questions come from a place of emotional distress on our part. In fact, if you think back to all of the examples saying no, don't, labeling our children, using absolute words, nonsensical questions, they all come from a place of emotional distress for us. So how do we manage our emotions? That's a topic that's a little bit larger than I'm going to cover today, and maybe we'll save that for a different day. But one of the ways you can start is by making a conscious effort to change your language. Building the foundation so far seems to be more about us than them, doesn't it? Yep, because it is. It's difficult to ask our children to be successful when we're not using the right language or we're not in control of our emotions. This has been a lot of information, and some people may be feeling overwhelmed, and some people may even be feeling annoyed because the direct focus hasn't been on those bad behaviors. But sometimes the indirect approach is actually more important. Remember that foundation, that solid foundation we're trying to build for our children so they can be successful. Let's move on and shift the focus to the child in question. Before we can actually create a plan to eliminate or change the behavior in question, we need to understand why. Why is this behavior happening? It doesn't matter who we are or how old we are or where we are in the world. All behaviors have a purpose. We behave to gain something, avoid something, or communicate something. If you think about the girl in class and she's got her hand up, what is she doing? Well, she's trying to gain the teacher's attention to communicate the answer or that she has something to say. People with anxiety will often behave in such a manner that allows them to avoid whatever situation or circumstance is that's creating that anxiety. Just telling a child to stop the behavior isn't enough. We need to teach the child what is the appropriate behavior, what is the more acceptable behavior. I mentioned earlier about teaching our children instead of just shutting them down. And that's a common theme in behavior management, teaching. Sometimes we also need to teach the right language to our children rather than just a behavior. This is typical of younger children first developing skills. If you think about a 2-year-old and she's trying to put on her shoe and it won't go on and she screams and yells and throws the shoe across the room. This is a perfect opportunity to provide the child with the possible emotion that's going on and to provide a new strategy. Wow, you sound so frustrated. That shoe just won't go on. Instead of throwing the shoe though, you could ask for help. Although the example I gave is for a toddler, the process is really the same regardless of age. We want to point out the emotion. We want to provide an alternate strategy. Usually it's about using words or asking for help. And quite possibly you want to let them know why that behavior is not okay. Here's another example. Johnny, you seem really annoyed that Mark took your book, but punching him is not okay. Now you're in trouble. Mark, that book isn't yours. It's rude to take something that doesn't belong to you. Give Johnny back his book, please. Johnny, next time yell at Mark to stop taking your things or yell for someone for help. Again, I've provided the possible feeling, why the action isn't okay, and giving him an alternate solution. Now, you may have noticed that I used the word yell twice, and many of you may be thinking, I don't want my child yelling around the house. This is actually a step we'd use for someone that has more severe behaviors, not hitting once in a while because they're frustrated, but somebody who's continuously being aggressive. Let me give you an example of when I was working in childcare. There was a boy in my school age program. He was 8 years old, very angry, very aggressive. He hit and kicked and punched everybody on a daily basis. And I was approached by the director one day and she said, if his behavior doesn't stop, he has to leave the daycare. I understood why she was saying this. I was the one that had to talk to all of these parents of the children that were getting injured every day. But I was mortified that an 8-year-old was going to be kicked out of daycare. So I went back and reevaluated what I'd been doing and how to make changes. I realized we had to do this gradually. The goal was stop hitting, kicking, and punching kids. That was my first goal. So when he got angry, he was allowed to hit, kick, and punch trees and fences. He couldn't hurt them. He could hurt himself. So he stopped that. The next step was yelling, and so on and so on. Again, if you think about that house, we don't just, whoop, there's your house. We build it in stages. There's a frame, there's a floor, there's a wall, etc. So for really aggressive behavior sometimes, we have to do it in gradual stages. That has been a lot of information, but I think we started to build a really good, solid foundation for our children to be successful to manage their behaviors. The next time we meet, we're going to look at what it is that is keeping our children from changing or eliminating these negative behaviors. We're also going to look at specific strategies to use to allow your children to change or eliminate their negative behaviors. Thank you for joining me again today, and until next time, goodbye.